help provide some experiential information and clinical expertise on the inner workings of treatment, and just lay out some opportunities to provide a perspective to treatment before, during, and after, and then how the peer teams or maybe clinicians that are involved in this Zoom today can be beneficial. And Ben is going to lead and guide us through that mostly. I'm an alumni of Chateau. I've been through the program, so I've been I did go to treatment myself with PTSD and alcoholism. So I have an experiential viewpoint, and then clinical. Ben's going to provide a really clinical viewpoint. So it'll be kind of tag team for us. But Ben, you want to take us off?
Yeah. Again, great to be here. Thanks for having us. There's a few things we want to accomplish today, but we're going to jump into it because we have lots to cover. When we talk about helping someone in treatment and post-treatment, we want to talk a bit about some of the assumptions of what it means. When we talk about helping someone arrive and not only accept treatment, there's some considerations. The first one is that people want this. Part of the challenge that we see, and again, I've been working at the Chateau for about 10 years. We've been doing direct first responder care for about the last 6. And so as I reference some of these things, this is most of our firsthand experience with clients that are coming in and the various forms of support they have. But most of the time when we talk about people arriving in treatment, most of them don't know what treatment is. So when we talk about speak up and to approach their peer support teams, we need to acknowledge that those peer support teams, people on those teams, have a wide range of experience. And so as we talk about people trying to figure out if and when they go to treatment, there's a couple of things we want to acknowledge. For one is that their amount of buy-in. Some people are internally motivated to heal and to grow and to be a certain kind of mother, father, co-worker, whatever that might look like. And some people, to be honest, are afraid of punishment. And so there might be an external force that is expecting them to be a recipient of treatment, and they themselves are still pretty cautious, if not maybe reluctant. The other one I want to acknowledge real quick that is a barrier or a factor when it comes to helping someone engage in treatment is that some departments have different sort of opinions about treatment. It's super common for people to see treatment as a punishment. In this particular culture, in our general popular culture, there is definitely some stigmas, some assumptions, and some things out there. And so we want to acknowledge that when people decide to engage in treatment, the reality is they might be doing it for different reasons. They might have some really do this kind of work. That being said, I also want to acknowledge that as we prepare someone to come to treatment, how the department navigates HR issues, how people look at things like job security, FMLA, insurance, just the idea of, is my family going to be provided for? Are they going to be okay? Are we going to be okay if I decide to let go of some of the control and to go to typically a different state, a different situation, and to engage? And it's a big ask. So as I speak to different clinicians as well as peer support in this particular venue, the reality is that there's a lot of folks who this is just new, scary territory. They don't understand what that means. And so oftentimes departments are just trying some of this stuff out, and they've never really kind of dealt with issues. And so if you are, I would say connecting with someone I run and helping them understand what that means is going to help bring some peace of mind and some security in this process. The FMLA the financial related conversation, how parents does things, stories out there that are unfortunately negative enough that be scammed. There are programs, there are situations out there where people are sadly being surprised by some bill at the treatment, and it is a preventative thing. If there are surprises and challenges and something that lends to the distrust that's already there in this culture when it comes to mental health, we need to do our best to try and soothe some of those concerns. So outside of the financial challenges and some of the trust issues they might have for a department or for the process, there is the reality of helping family. We at the Chateau, we've got a family curriculum that we help people engage in, that answers some questions.
Hey, Ben, this is Lieutenant Catalano from the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office. Your audio is cutting out, so we're missing a lot of what you're saying.
Fix that. Besides, just wait. You guys still hear me at all?
Yeah, you're pretty scratchy, man.
Is it back? Is it working now?
There you go.
There we go. Is that any better? I'll move it a little closer.
Yep.
All right. Where's the last part that you heard?
Family programs.
Family programs. Well, when we talk about family programs, some treatment facilities have a instrument to kind of help families navigate this process. Some don't. When I talk about family support, a lot of times what our responders are concerned about is someone looking out for them. And some departments have a more robust and organized system of someone's going to reach out, connect, offer a word of kindness or acknowledgement, or mow the lawn, provide meals. There's a whole range of different kinds of things that I've seen over the number of years. But a lot of times it is my family going to be alone? Now, keep in mind, a lot of the responders who are already so depleted and tired and discouraged, they're not offering a ton of support for their family anyway. But the concept of letting go of some control and letting my family kind of wing it on their own is pretty scary. And so, again, want to acknowledge that there are some cool, creative programs that are across the country that find a way to support and communicate with families. But I do know that as we've had lots of people considering treatment, as soon as they get the message from their department or someone in peer support saying, we'll connect with them, we'll be positive, we'll help them deal with it. Those are incredibly valuable. And unfortunately, I've also heard lots of stories of clients in the program that come and engage, and the reality is their families feel very alone, very isolated. No one cares, no one understands them, and then the distrust kind of continues from there. So I wanted to kind of acknowledge that, financially, there's a number of things that create a high amount of stress for any of our responders coming in and landing in treatment. But there are some things we can do to acknowledge that. And we'll talk about on the other side of that hiccup.
Yeah, you were doing pretty good until right there at the last.
Okay. Is more of an empathy comment. As we get into some clinical and logistical support, I do want to underscore that what would you want if you were going into treatment, right? What would you want from someone else, from a mindset perspective, from a logistical perspective? That is a big factor. As we talk about someone landing in treatment, it's incredibly intimidating. So recognize that, when people are arriving in treatment, there's multiple layers, or what I would call kind of compounding elements of stress that is kind of on their plate. For some of the folks, they've not ever engaged in treatment of any kind. For a lot of them, the idea of letting go of control, letting other people in, connecting with those kinds of things, they themselves are incredibly stressed, very guarded, very protective of being in treatment and what treatment means. And for some of them, they still believe all of those negative stigmas that say you're weak, you're pathetic, you're broken. And I want to acknowledge that's a piece of it. The other layer I want to add to the empathy is just what it's like to be a new person in treatment. A lot of our responders get there and they are the FNG. They show up, and for the first time, oftentimes in their lives, they're expected to be vulnerable, insightful, to be articulate, and to be emotional, and to do all these different things. And typically it is outside of the skill set they have, and they're expected to be good at it pretty quickly. A lot of our responders have a bit of perfectionism to the way they think. And so the reality is they show up in treatment and overall they're just pretty intimidated. They don't have the skills. They feel pretty overwhelmed. And on top of that, they are raw. And so as they engage in treatment, they're just families incredibly sympathetic to their situation and are angry. And they're tired and they're discouraged. And so the family's got their own trauma of enduring all sorts of difficulties through mental health, maybe substance abuse. And they may come from a department that themselves is not been very communicative. A lot of times there's some confusion and frustration about the mixed messages that the department might be giving them. They might have a lot of concerns about whether or not they're going to have a job. And so there's this expectation that is usually on people's shoulders that is several layers thick. And so as we get into what it means to help those people and for departments to be stronger and positive and a force for good, I want to acknowledge that there is a bunch going on. And at all times, when I talk to peer support or departments, the question then comes up, what would you want if you were under that amount of stress? If you were that new, that discouraged, that overwhelmed, what would you want if you were in their shoes? And if that is your guide throughout this process, you're usually going to do some pretty good things. Even though it may not be perfect, the reality is they will understand that your heart is there. And I can't count the amount of responders that we've had in the program who have said, I've worked with people who are technically very intelligent, but to be honest, they never reached out, we never connected, and I never got the warmth, compassion, or the support that I needed at that time. So anyway, the idea of what's it like to be in their shoes, I just want to underscore that before aspects. Questions is when someone's arriving in treatment, how does peer support be a part of that arrival? Hopefully there is a point person established before someone to process. And so who is this point person? Do they have they already had some kind of context? Do they have some kind of expectations of that? A lot of times, to be honest, it's so awkward. A lot of peer support or even professionals just don't reach out because they want it to. What I've heard before is, I want the client to have their own experience and I don't want to be intrusive. I appreciate the sentiment of that, but for the most part, clients said, I just want to know who's on my team and whether or not I have some resources or someone who's doing something we do recommend that if they do have a point person, obviously they've been in some contact with them as they travel to the facility. As they're arriving at the facility, most facilities are going to say, hey, reach out, tell your family you're here, you're safe, and that you're good. Yeah, we want that phone call to happen. When that phone call happens, we encourage people to keep it, be positive, acknowledge, hey, you're doing some powerful things, you're show up and allow them to understand that we have you. We got you. We're going to keep track of some things. We'll be watching out for your family and your friends, and we'll watch out for your dog, whatever that might look like. They need to hear those messages. They need to hear that, hey, even though you might feel alone while you're in Utah or wherever you might be, the reality is we can help out with that. I think a lot of times it's
Hey,
important to
Ben.
acknowledge.
Hey, Ben.
Yeah.
Hey, Ben.
Yeah.
Hey, Ben, why don't you try turning your camera off? Stop your video
My
and
camera
keep
off.
your audio on. Yeah, try to, because you're still coming in really scratchy.
Really? Okay. So turning off my camera. Got it.
Yeah.
You mean switching cameras or just turn off my camera?
No, just turn your video off. Just stop video.
Will that still share my screen still?
Just still share your screen and it'll still have audio.
You can still hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'm gonna
All right,
disconnect.
keep going.
Okay.
And I do want to pose a very experiential viewpoint on this as well. I think to follow up what Ben's talking about with his point of contact. I think because I ran peer support teams and I actually was a peer support commander. I think there's a trepidation of from a peer support team member overstepping or having an undue, if not a negative influence on their treatment when they get there, of somehow checking in and being involved, maybe overstepping and negatively influencing. And that's just not the case. They really want to hear from their safe people at home. So
Yep.
just a little tidbit there, Ben.
Usually when there's just a lot of anxiety, process of asking a lot of questions. And sometimes, again, for someone who feels very overwhelmed, very raw, very disconnected, they don't know which way is up. They're not sure about the details of the program quite yet. Even though, for us at the Chateau, and I'm sure other programs, we try to give as many answer as many questions as possible before they arrive. But the reality is when someone's dysregulated, overwhelmed, preoccupied, or full of shame and guilt about being in this particular situation, they don't retain hardly anything. So the same thing is true as they first arrive in treatment. They're going to be likely to be in a spot where they want to say, I'm fine, I'm great, don't worry about it. Super common for any of us to be in that level of discomfort, for us to want to promise things or say, don't worry about it. I mean, the common joke shared every day in treatment is everyone's pretty good at saying they're fine, when the reality is that's one of the most common lies in this process. So just to be aware that, not only offering that supportive, validating message of you got this, hang in there, we're going to cover your family and friends or whatever that might look like, we got you, but also kind of giving them permission to disconnect, not worry about a certain return to work date, be back on a squad. I can't count the amount of people early in the process who feel like I got to leave treatment. Ironically, I need to maybe even sabotage my treatment so I can get back home and be this person that people expect me to be. So anytime we can set empowering messages. So going off from that a little bit, the reality is that there is a potential for really early, which is someone who's going against medical advice. Different programs experience it in different ways. In adolescent treatment, this is the period where people are trying to run away, right? In adult treatment, you don't see it quite as much because these are volunteer candidates who are acknowledging they want to be there. But to be honest, the reality is that there is a lot of situations where clients arrive, they're overwhelmed, they're tired, they're discouraged, usually they're sleep deprived, and all they can think about is what's wrong, about the emotions, about being overwhelmed, the shame. And so those first 10 days, it's not uncommon for people to show up and look around and say, I don't relate to anybody. My trauma is not like theirs. I don't understand what's happening. And they end up kind of creating a bit of a list of why this isn't going to work. And it's not that they aren't qualified to be in treatment. It's not that they don't have real issues to work on. It's not even that they. It's a pretty defense mechanism rich sort of situation for them, and they can't see. They can't see beyond their nose. They can't see beyond the emotion of it, and they don't understand what it means. But we've had a number of moments where good people who are excited about treatment arrive and they are dysregulated, they're overwhelmed, they're discouraged, and they're, for the first time, in many cases, not medicating. And they don't have a clear view of what life is going to look like and how life is going to be better. And so they end up sometimes creating some sabotage. And what I mean by sabotage is just these behaviors that we all do at times where we get overwhelmed and get very narrowly focused on the moment or an emotion. And we end up doing something that goes against our big picture goals. And so we've had moments where peer support has jumped in those moments and just said, hey, sometimes there's a tough love conversation. Sometimes there's a suck it up. But for the most part, that's usually part of the problem is the culture of suck it up, don't worry about it, don't share it, ends up creating some of those concerns. But just want to acknowledge that when people first get in treatment, they're overwhelmed, sometimes they're discouraged, and they do not have a clear vision of the future. And they do need, when I say a tough love conversation, usually it means tough in terms of honest, clear, and an empathetic. We know this is overwhelming. We know this is way outside of your comfort zone. Hang in there. You can do it. Because they might come and say, here's all the things, the paperwork, the bills, the issues that need to be done. I'm the only one that can go home and fix all these problems. And they have a couple of phone calls they're going to make. And when that happens, they're going to ask for you to give them permission to not have to do the tough work of sitting there in that emotion and managing all these thoughts and feelings. So as those conversations might come your way, please know that patience, empathetic, and direct boundary of you made a commitment, the course, those things end up positive impact. Can you guys still hear me okay? Am I still?
No, keep going. You're hitting it pretty good. I think the video helped.
Okay, great. So when we talk about this process, so I'm not going to talk a ton about what it means to what happens over the course of treatment. I'm not going to talk about that piece too much, but I will acknowledge that everyone who goes through treatment is basically building a plan. Plan is a bit of a challenge because it's different for everybody. But as that happens, they're going to be what we call the self-leadership plan. Others might call it a discharge plan, but it is a collection of tools and ideas that might be connected to their sobriety goals, some of their physical goals, and they are going to be putting together some agreements and expectations of what it means to be healthy after they leave treatment. So as they do that, there's going to be a number of recommendations that are also expected of them. Those expectations might be about follow-up care. As I acknowledge here on the slide, there's different resources. Sometimes that's PHP or IOP support meetings. There's a number of things that we're going to ask them to do. Here at the Chateau, one of the biggest things we want to share and kind of set an expectation around is the idea of ownership. Clients to go through this process, our main goal is for them to acknowledge they are categorically different than other folks. They have different trauma, they have different challenges, they have different fears, concerns, mindsets, and there's tons of complexity to their particular experience. Our goal is to help them figure out patterns, ideas, and even tools that are going to help them self-regulate as they return to their jobs and their families and find a way to deal with all that stress. As they do that, we ask them to capture those ideas and to put it into a plan, and a plan is robust enough to make some sense that and teach that same plan they're with. And that's where peer support becomes essential. Because a lot of times people, when they think about treatment, they think it is about some miracle experience where you show up in Utah or some other place and you show up and you have this incredible, Disneyland experience where, it's a happy ending. And what happens from there is that the assumption oftentimes in families and sometimes for peer support and for just general public, there is this belief that they're now going to be intuitive and engaged and creative, and they will have cup filled in so many forms. They don't need to have any more reminders or challenges. Yeah, that's just simply not true. So the concept of the big picture long-term plan is essential in this process. And our hope is that they can sit down with peer support and say, this is how it's going to work when I get home. This is what I'm going to do on my rough days. And they need a place to explain that, to teach that, and to acknowledge those kind of dynamics. So I want to talk a little bit about, they go through this therapeutic process, and we want to explore a couple of those realities. One, I already kind of got into a little bit. They go to treatment, and let's say it goes great. Let's say the miracle happens, right? And that they show up day one, they get started, they're accountable, and they're insightful, and they're very aware, and they accept and appreciate all the support, and they can't wait to share the message to everybody out there that, hey, there's good news. I've seen lots of those experiences. I'm really excited that they happen. And they are motivated to come home and talk about all of their their changes, talk about their sobriety, talk about their marriage, talk about their financial health. Maybe that's a little too idealistic, but there is this assumption out there that everything goes great and they knock it out of the park in every little category. We hope that happens. And to be honest, it happens a lot where people come home and they are eager to show up in meetings. They're willing to share their story with other people. I advocate and acknowledge all the time when I can with our first responders that their ability to communicate what worked and what is different and how they're going to maintain those kind of changes, that is going to help create a different culture in your department. And the more often that happens, there's some really magical stuff that having a pretty positive impact. However, that's not the only thing that happens. As we acknowledge, the other thing that's true is that sometimes we just don't know immediately. And so I'll call that neutral. But is it possible that someone shows up in treatment and they showed up in treatment because they're being a good little soldier, and they don't want to lose their jobs, and they are skeptical, maybe a little sarcastic, maybe a little guarded, maybe a little salty, and they are showing up, doing the work, filling out some of the paperwork, showing up in group, and they were maybe something in the middle road of maybe there are other hearts in it, and other areas they're like, yeah, I'm doing this because I'll get out in 30 days and we'll see how this all goes. There's a good percentage of folks who are coming to treatment, they're going to be in that spot. And I want to acknowledge this real quick, because sometimes people see that neutral stance where, to be honest, we're not really sure how much of the work they did. We're not sure about how vulnerable and how honest and how deep they dug to do some of these personal changes. And it's just too soon to say. And I would say that's probably the majority of Americans out there, if you want to call it. I know a couple of Canadians on the call as well. But the truth is, most of us are a work in progress, and we're not sure. We're going to be a little bit hesitant. And we might tell our families like, hey, I'm going to come back a new man. And guess what? They may not be a new man. And they might share some ideas. And there's going to be a couple of ideas that are still pretty salty and defensive and irritated. And they haven't figured out the kinks of how to integrate some of these new tools into their life. I want to acknowledge that real quick, because oftentimes peer support are the folks that see that stuff first. And I want to acknowledge that your interpretation of those behavior is pretty critical. It does happen at times where if people expect the miracle and a pure, positive, overwhelming, perfect specimen leaving treatment, if that is the only definition of success, then people who are probably a bit more normal and say, I'm not too sure yet, I don't know how I'm going to work out these details. If that is interpreted as oh, this person really didn't try, treatment really didn't work. I want to acknowledge the danger that exists with that. And I think there is some pressure. Clients themselves in this process, they absolutely know they're under a microscope. But peer support and the mental health folks that are surrounding someone who is leaving treatment, they need to see that bigger picture. They need to understand that this person is in the process of digesting a lot of things. This person's in the process of evolving, maturing, and making some decisions, some long-term decisions about what it means to change. And if we don't bring some compassion and some perspective, and especially a perspective from a trauma-informed perspective, we might become a bit more skeptical, irritable, and maybe even judgmental of what these neutral behaviors look like. And again, the challenge of it sometimes is that when we see someone leaving treatment who might look a little bit like they did before, but they've really made some important changes, if we don't see that, understand it, and acknowledge that, hey, some of these things are going to take some time. Sometimes administrators and other folks end up seeing someone's weaknesses as they leave treatment as evidence that the process is really not working and the process is not going to improve. We need to be really mindful of that. Now, keep in mind that as we cover this last little chunk, the reality is there are some folks who go to treatment and you know what? They don't want. They want help and they want to save their jobs to an extent. But the reality is some folks show up at treatment and they are salty and bitter and resentful, and they are beyond burned out. And they are years deep into some pretty problematic, defensive, resentful, crappy attitude. And a handful of days in treatment and some EMDR and other things that are fundamentally good hasn't changed them overnight. The concept of, you can't tell me what to do, I'm a grown-ass man, that is incredibly common, right? And the good news is that a lot of folks hear that, maybe do it for the first little while in treatment, and then towards the end of treatment, they recognize like, okay, that sounds pretty silly. I don't need to slap away all these forms of support. And most of them kind of snap out of it and recognize like, okay, when I say I'm a grown-ass man, that's probably evidence that I'm not as grown-ass as I think I am. So, and they do have some awareness of some of that self-sabotage that they're doing. But I do want to acknowledge that there's the reality that some might go to treatment and just fight it. And they might disconnect and they might call home way more often than we want and continue to engage and not use a lot of different tools. And sometimes there's just not a lot of commitment. I think there are folks that have left treatment that I've said, wow, I don't know if that's going to go well at all. Or I'm expecting a disaster when they get home. And I love being wrong. And I'm glad there's lots of folks that have said, you know what, as soon as when I go home, I can do it on my terms and it'll be more powerful. And that happens a lot. But I just want to acknowledge as we talk about this process of helping someone leave treatment, the reality is sometimes they don't want it and they don't engage and they don't connect. And we're gonna talk about what we do with those kinds of situations. But the reality is it's a thing. When we are in the business of helping people, especially dealing with people who have a lot of trauma, we have to acknowledge that people who are in the middle of trauma oftentimes feel very hopeless, powerless, and worthless, and they can't see very far. And there are some folks that have been in it for years. Oftentimes they continue trauma from their childhood and have additional layers that's added to that, through their job experience. There are some folks that are just incredibly defended. As we see those folks coming out of treatment too, my stance on that is we still need to help them own, find the ownership, find their voice, and find some of their values that they can connect with. Basically, what I'm saying with that is I think there are folks who come out of treatment saying that program didn't do it for me. And they think the responsibility was on the program. And again, keep in mind, these are the same folks that have long-term resentments towards their department. And if the department makes a mistake, they just focus on that for a while. I do think it's important for them to get the empathy, for us to be patient, for us to be sympathetic to their situation, as long as we keep the discussion on their ownership and what they can do and what they do have and what they what options and opportunities are in front of them. They may not see it very well, but the reality is some folks are going to take some time, and some folks may not accept all of the invitations we'd like them to. So as we talk about, how do we help folks? One of the things we want to do in treatment is to anticipate. I was just having a conversation this morning with the group, and today's conversation was about that transition home. And to be honest, there was a couple of folks in groups saying, like, I'm going to have a rough day. My spouse is going to say something, my coworkers might say something, and I'm triggered by going by the usual corner on the usual street where I've seen all sorts of crazy stuff. Those are rough days. As they have those days, again, our hope is that they anticipate and discuss those days, and as peer support and mental health are receiving them, it's important for us to set up those conversations and say, tell me about the bad days. Tell me what kind of tools you want us to use in those days. Tell me which ways we can give you a signal or a little break or a little suggestion to help you integrate some of these new concepts. But the mindset that we hope for on the peer support side of this is that, again, we're not going to jump to shame and to judgment, and I can't believe you're still stuck on these ideas. The department mindset about, it makes sense that things aren't going to be perfect. It makes sense that you're going to be overwhelmed. It makes sense that you're going to be stuck. I think the mindset of those who are interpreting those kind of behaviors makes a huge impact. But the reality is that we want departments to have those conversations, ideally before they leave treatment. It might be in the initial days and weeks right after someone leaves treatment. We want those conversations to happen, not that we're trying to, again, set up a scenario where we are micromanaging them. I think that is a very popular and unfortunate dynamic that exists in this process, is that most people, especially in a system that is very, that focuses a lot on control, especially when it comes to leadership and management sometimes, a lot of folks feel like I'm leaving treatment and I now the only thing people want to hear from me is that I'm better. And if I'm not better, then they're going to start to write more reports and I'm going to be more scrutinized and all that kind of stuff. Ideally, if there's an honest, direct conversation early on about accountability, hey, we want to help you to integrate your new plan and to figure out how to integrate some of these new skills and attitudes that you learned in treatment, and we're going to keep you accountable to that. So how often do we need to sit down and anticipate when you're going to need to have some of those conversations? When you're having a rough day, who are you calling? It may not be anyone in the department. It may not be peer support, but who's going to be that point person? Is it okay if we come back in a month? And I might not hear every layer of your plan, but I do want to acknowledge that there are some things, some markers of health that you want to have in place. I'm going to ask you some simple questions of whether or not those things are happening. Those are tough conversations that, for the most part, people leaving treatment are relieved to have. I think usually it's peer support on the department side that's a little bit uncomfortable. By the time someone's leaving treatment, they actually want to share their plan. They want to talk about accountability. They want to talk about some of these skills and how they might show up. But a lot of times it's people at home that are a little uncomfortable and a little awkward. The other part I want to acknowledge real quick is this concept of codependence. A lot of times, again, there are moments where peer support wants to save everybody. And I want to acknowledge that if we're helping people take responsibility for their health and to become better, more empowered problem solvers at managing their mental health and managing their self-regulation skills, the reality is you may not be able to save all of them. So a lot of times, asking what their plan looks like, how do we integrate that plan at home, how do we talk about this more often, and how do we anticipate some of those rough days, and what do we do in those rough days? Those kind of conversations end up being way more positive. And to be honest, I've seen folks who have been basically in the shadows of their departments for years saying, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, get on some of these phone calls and some of these conversations when they first get home. And most of the time, peer support is like, wow, this person's got just a bunch of ideas. And so if I get them talking and discussing, there ends up being some pretty productive discussion that happens. The other piece I'll add to that, or wait, no. Brad, anything on this last little slide that you want to comment on?
No, I think we're really rocking along pretty good. I had my mind on the chat, but I did put in the chat earlier that I think humanizing. I'm going to go back to that department and peer support team concept of really humanizing and how would you like to be received. I know you hit on that, but from an experiential standpoint, you know, they've already we have already, and your people have already experienced a level of honesty and pretty honest feedback that they're already familiar with. As painful it is as it is early, if they've completed the program, they've already been in an environment that has been a very raw and honest feedback about what some of their behaviors, thoughts, feelings, emotions are. So oftentimes with peer support team members, when we receive those people back, we think having these honest conversations can maybe be detrimental. And the reality is they're extremely beneficial to this person. You know, and what I put in the chat was, you know, tempered with some compassion and some patience, but really looking at that, you know, what end game and where we want to help them arrive to, which is a peaceful life, of something a little more serene, whether it's, you know, their mental health issues or substance abuse or both. So yeah, I just want to offer up that this is a really great opportunity to give some good, honest feedback with some compassion and patience. So
yeah. The last thing I'll kind of comment on is this micromanagement thing. I think the supervise someone into health is a pretty common reaction. It's pretty unnerving. Usually people that are last week in treatment, they're just like, ugh, I don't know, you know, what they're, you know, everyone knows that departments, there's gossip, there's discussions. I've seen a range of some people that get to their phones and they think not a single person has reached out and gave a shit about me, right? And that's incredibly sad for them. Sometimes a little daunting because it means I am now in charge of disseminating all the information about me. I ask a lot of our clients to prepare what I call an elevator speech. And so when you get home, do you have a speech you can give to people who are asking, where have you been for the last, you know, 30, 60 days? And are you willing to share a little bit about what that means? You know, you don't have to give them a diagnosis. You don't have to out yourself in any particular way. You don't have to be incriminating at all. But the reality is you need to be managing that narrative and helping, you know, basically give people stuff to talk about that is within what you want to talk about. And most of the time they receive that and they're pretty excited about it, but they usually need someone to kind of practice with. And usually that's where peer support comes in. Sometimes they have a leadership, some of the leadership team that they trust, but a lot of times, to be honest, they're a little nervous about the health of the department because they're going to stand out. They might have a pretty complex plan of, hey, when we're having a rough day, these are the kind of skills I learned in treatment, but I might look a little funny doing it. I might need to step away for a minute. I might need to process with someone. I might need to do a phone call. And am I going to be judged and criticized for doing those kinds of things? And so they just need to bounce some ideas off of someone. So like Brad said, the challenge is there, but I've seen lots of great peer support that have said, I don't know how to help you, but I know I want to help you. I'm not sure where to start and where to point you, but we can start here and we can bounce off some ideas and let's kind of navigate this process together. That brings down the tension. That usually takes some of the anxiety out of the process. And it says, you know, we're both kind of new at this. It is kind of awkward. It is kind of difficult, but overall, like, you're not alone. I think that ends up being a message that people are excited about and say, okay, I can do this. Anyway. So to recap, again, the message of it takes a ton of courage to take this leap. It takes a ton of courage to set all of the need for control, the need to be hidden, the need to cover up all of these kinds of things, and to take this leap into a different portion of your life. I can't say enough how important it is and how validating it is for us to say, you're doing it. You're doing better than you think. Hang in there, keep going, and to connect with that empathetic message as often as possible. Keep them talking, listen to their plans, ask them to explain their plans again and again. The more often they have a chance to teach and to connect with some of these concepts, the less likely they are to regress into some negative behavior. But when they do get back into some regressive moments, it's okay to say, shit, that's what happens. We're all pretty human. There was no version of this where you're going to be killing it. There's no version of this where you don't have some kind of re-injury, whether that's, re-experiencing some trauma, you have your ego bruised, or something doesn't go quite as planned. But we have this, you can do this, and let's keep our eye on those big picture goals. We'll stop at this point, I think, right, to answer some questions and talk about some ideas. Does that sound right, Brad?
Yeah, let's see if we can stop the share and turn your camera on, and maybe
Got it. Let me work on that. I'm gonna plug a couple things in real quick.
we'll see your ugly mug on there, man.
Yeah, careful what you ask for. Okay. Stopping the share.
So yeah, anybody have any comments, questions, dilemmas, maybe experiences that you can share that are pertinent to the topic today?
Yeah, I have something. This is Lance from Clear Path for Veterans. I'm a peer mentor for a veteran peer, right? And I think it was Brad when you opened up, correct?
Yes.
I think
Yes.
without meaning to, you touched on an important topic when you kind of rolled through your bio and said, I don't want to go over it. I think bios are really critical in gaining that rapport. So you roll out that bio so they understand who they're speaking to, and then you have the relatability, and it starts to develop the trust and the rapport. I think that's pretty key, as at least in the way I operate with fellow veterans.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Lance. What Ben and I, the approach we took was that our bio was given out by the first response folks, the Peer Connect folks, and I really was trying to give Ben a little more time on that, but I think that's a great point.
I
And I do throw out in my bio when I talk to people in preparing them, specifically any anxious or anxiety, fear, trepidation based conversations. One of the things is I'm a 25-year law enforcement veteran, retired as a captain. And that looks good on paper. However, I did attend Chateau. I'm an alumni of Chateau with PTSD and alcoholism. So that's a pretty quick 30-second sell. So I think it's a great point, Lance. Yep.
Yeah, I thought you were just being humble early on, but I just, from my own experience, I was in the Army for 22. So my quick bio, I was in the Army for 22 years. I did 5 overseas tours, 1 Iraq, 3 Afghan. So there are very few veterans that I can't relate to when they're kind of spilling what's going on for themselves. I often can, just like the bio, your own bio, I can often relate, like, been there, done that. And I find that to be a very powerful tool, at least to initiate those interactions.
Yeah, I think for a teaching point related to the webinar, I think you're spot on, Lance. I do think there's a fine line there where it becomes a tit for tat or an ego contest or a one bigger than. So my personal approach to that is I keep on the low side of that. And if they offer up, well, you don't know this, I say, well, here's my experience with that. And I haven't experienced all things, but there's very many times where I can say, well, I have a very similar here or this or that, or here's something that I feel may be relatable, or here's my betrayal, here's my administrative betrayal, here's my relational betrayal. I mean, just the opportunity of connection, I think, to allow them the space. And really, what I think you're doing there, Lance, is you're creating this safe space of connection to really have them buy in, to say, okay, this person gets me. Because really, at the end of the day, a lot of this is about connection. You get a person into treatment, and they think this happens over and over and over, and a person sitting in there saying, nobody understands where I'm at, and within minutes, somebody across the room's telling a story, and they say, wow, you basically have told my story. And that connection really begins, to your point, Lance, really begins early on in that process of saying, hey, I'm trying to see you, help me see you, and not taking an ego approach to that. Great point.
I would add a tiny bit more to that, because I think that's one of those themes that I think is super relevant. I agree. I think it's important to not hijack someone's experience by making it about us, but I do encourage constantly, when it comes to family or anyone involved, relating to someone's emotion and saying, like, man, I feel that, I've felt that before, especially when it comes to that isolation, that challenge, or that shame. Like, dude, that shame is real. You know, that judgment, the self-criticism, like, I've been there, felt it. I understand why you might be hesitant, even skeptical. All of those kinds of things, as we brushed up our skills to be more validating and connecting and empathetic, that ends up keeping them feeling safer than we expected, and they keep on moving forward, whether that's sharing or whether that's connecting. So yeah, I can't say enough. I did see a comment real quick that's asked about how we can incorporate families more in peer support. The family piece is interesting. And again, I think this is a great question. There's lots of creative answers that are out there. I had a chance to go to a conference last week where there was some creative ideas shared about how we can incorporate families. I would say reaching out to families and saying, how are you holding up? And not expecting there to be a good answer for that. I think there's a probably 25-30% of the clients that we see into the program, their families are like, I don't want to talk because I'm so pissed. And they're not ready to do whatever it takes. Some of them have been doing whatever it takes for a long time, and their marriage is in a really shitty spot. That's very common. So families sometimes want space, but they do want the choice. They do want to be heard. They do want to be acknowledged. So reaching out and saying, how are you holding up? What do you need? What's going on? Some people need space. Our bias is, we're going to give you some resources, and we're going to give them to you at your speed. So you might need a week to not talk to anybody. That might be fine. But you might need also some direction. And you're tired of being the one that's kind of compensated for this loved one who's been sick and struggling. And so how about we give you some support, give you some direction. A lot of families aren't sure what to do with all the energy they have. Sometimes they've got their own trauma, and they're saying, I need someone to care about me, take care of me. And sometimes just connecting them with maybe a local resource, could be their EAP or some local therapists. Sometimes there's some online support groups. That is one of the upsides of COVID, is that we've got a lot more things happening online that are less than ideal, but overall, there's a wide range of options that are available to them. For us, we provide, basically a 30-40 hour curriculum to our families that says, hey, watch this, and they're going to learn about healing. You're going to learn about trauma. You're going to learn about your mindset. And how about we just take care of you for a little while and not have you just manage or micromanage your loved one. So for the most part, they're reaching out to family and just saying, what do you need? What's going on? They might also, very likely say, I'm fine, I'm good, don't worry about us. That is rarely ever true. But the reality is the continual reach out, what's going on, how can I connect you with some things? Nowadays, whether it's podcasts, I know we do a podcast together. There are other websites that have some resources. Programs themselves should have some resources, but there's more and more out there. But a lot of times there really is no substitution for the warm reach out. How you doing? What's going on? I wish I had more resources. I'll look into it for you. But overall, I just want to know that you're not alone. I think that is one of the harder messages that families just want to know. And again, a lot of times it might just be, hey, do you need a vent? You just kind of just gripe and moan about how tough this has been for a little bit without any kind of judgment or concerns or issues. So just want to advocate, even though you may not have some formal resources to provide, there are ones that are out there. We're happy to connect people with different kind of resources. But there is no substitute for thinking about you. How are you doing? How are you holding up? Where do you want to start? That makes all the difference.
I think I'd like to add to that a little bit as well. I think from a family, if you look at this and try to humanize some of the family, specifically spousal, there's some things that I think are important to understand about that. One is we don't, you as a peer team member may understand their perspective, but you're looking at potential betrayalish, administrative betrayal, administrative conflict, internal strife, internal fighting, possible discipline, possible. I mean, and the family knows this, possibly knows it, may not know the gravity of it, but you have to assume they probably do. So the family may be irritable, if not pissed, at the department, and you're going to be the recipient of some of that. On top of, we see oftentimes this really misconception of, we sent him or her to get fixed. It was your job to fix them. When they come back, they need to be the old person. And that just doesn't happen. When they come back, they may be on the right path. Hopefully they're on a good path. Hopefully it's the success piece that Ben was talking about. But the reality is there's still work to be done. So as a peer team member, that was one of the great things that it was difficult to understand, is receiving them back. It's a work in progress, and we have to come alongside them. And you're probably, as a peer team member, and such a great question, as a peer team member, connecting that, you're probably going to get beat up a little bit on both sides of the fence on that deal. But that's why that's what we do as peer team members. That's what we do. We kind of stand in the gap. We're the conduit for this, creating this safe space for this person who has been through whatever they've been through, and the department. Now you add in, some family issues. Now it's connecting with the family and saying, hey, the reality is we're coming alongside them to join them on their work path. So I hope that's helpful, and really can join Ben in his part as well in that. Is that helpful?
Hi there. Sorry to interrupt. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
My name's Simone. I'm from First Response Mental Health. So I primarily worked with, in regard to this, youth receiving treatment. But I could see this being a really unique experience in the sense that, families might be thinking this is a lot of work related to stress or trauma. But for example, if someone was utilizing substances to cope, whether it be drinking or drugs or whatever else, and may have been doing this for a long time in their lives to cope with any form of trauma or stress, once those things are addressed, so much else can come out, right? Like beyond that, of even just, memories and experiences. So the idea of, okay, maybe some of, the workplace, those tools have been put in place, but they might come home quite different or have a lot to unpack. They might have been closed off before, but now they're feeling, right? They have emotions that they may not have felt for years. So that's that would definitely be something to prepare family for, right?
Great point. No, I think that's way more common than people realize. They actually are starting to see a little transformation over the course of a few weeks of someone being gone. And I've talked to many spouses that are like, wow, this is really exposing. I'm feeling pretty vulnerable because I haven't answered some of these kind of questions about myself. I don't know what I think about me. I've never addressed some of this childhood stuff. And so I think most people feel pretty intimidated, but I agree, as we educate them about self-medication or about how trauma works or those kinds of things, hopefully when we put it in context, it sounds a little less intimidating. But for the most part, that's new territory for some families. And as long as they cut themselves a little bit of slack, it goes pretty well. But there's many families that are saying, wow, especially spouses that are saying, is my loved one still going to want to be with me? Because I've not grown up. I've not evolved in some of the ways that I've watched them evolve since they've been in treatment. So usually those that acknowledge it and talk about it do better than those that don't. But that's for sure a big dynamic.
Thanks, Simone. Anybody else? I do think it's important as we kind of wrap this up. When Ben and I built this, I meant to note this early on. This is kind of the ideal picture. There are some extreme outliers to treatment that, and probably if you've been involved in this game any at all as peer support or clinical work, there's these, kind of worst case scenario type stories. That's really not what we were referencing today. We were referencing the overall generic kind of Ben and I's experience of here's what's common, what we commonly see. So I certainly don't want to think this is the end all of all. There are some crazy stories out there about leaving mad or it didn't work or this and that. So I just want to leave. Ben, you want to comment any of that at all? Because I meant to say that early and we didn't.
No, I agree. I think yeah, we don't know what change is supposed to look like. We never know what's going on for other people, and so acknowledging that we're all in the same boat, we're all trying our best to figure out this stuff. Again, that empathetic message of I'm curious to see how your healing process works. It's likely to look very different than mine, but I can't wait to hear about it. There's lots of great ways we can help support them, even though it might look, might show up in different forms.
Any other comments, questions?
I have one if we got a minute or two.
Yeah, Lance.
So I notice on the meeting here, there seems to be an awful lot of clinicians and mental health professionals and things. One of the most interesting, valuable things I learned from where I work, we have a licensed clinical social worker. She was with the VA for 30 years. And so at least this pertains to veterans specifically, but can probably be transposed into other professions or other circumstances. She's not a veteran. And so when they would jab her with, hey, you couldn't possibly know, her answer was amazing. She was like, well, you're right. I'm not a veteran, but I've spent the better part of my adult life committed to helping veterans, and I'm here to help you get at this. And it was really effective. Like it's just that honesty, like, you know what, you're right. I'm not a veteran. I can't relate to that piece, but I've dedicated a lot of my life to helping veterans. And so that could probably be used in law enforcement or any other peer circumstances from for our clinicians that maybe can't relate firsthand on the particular issue.
Great point. But beneath all the surface and all the labels and all the titles, when we can connect with people, and this is true for any of the people that we work with, when we humanize them and connect with them and recognize like, hey, I'm in the same struggle as you. We're all just fumbling around trying to make the best of this experience. We're all just heading towards some of these values that really matter to us. I think when we connect at that level, I think we end up getting a little bit more forgiveness from those who are cautious. But yeah, I think sometimes that is it's a more vulnerable step for professionals sometimes, because we're great at giving these calculated, organized, clinical answers, when the reality is people just want to know like, hey, do you see that I'm hurting? And we just need someone else to understand that we're hurting.
I just think the honesty is so key. And I'll give you a short veteran example. When I work with a Vietnam veteran, I'm very honest to them. I said, I can't possibly know what your generation of veteran has felt, the way you were handled when you came home. I can't even begin to relate to, I'm only 55 years old. So I was like, I can't imagine half a century of mistrust and not treated very well. And so sometimes when I hit them with that level of honesty, like, you're right, I was thanked for my service, I'm sorry that you weren't. Sometimes just that relatability or honesty seems to kind of bridge the gap.
Right. Good point. Love it.
Well, I think as we wrap up, and if anybody has anything else, please speak up. But I just want to, well, first make an apology for Ben's audio. I apologize for that. He actually sings much worse than what his audio actually presents there. But we apologize for that. But I do want to thank Caitlin for all her help, Michaela and Nick for allowing us the opportunity to jump on here. We're very passionate about this. We love what we do. We end up helping a lot of people. I put my information in the chat. Ben and I's email are in the chat. If you have any follow-up questions, we'd love to entertain that. When we built this and started preparing for this, there was actually another segment of this that was very important to us that we just didn't feel like would give enough space to talk about, and which is really this: how do we support people at home? Which it came up in a question already. I think Ann offered that up. How do we connect the family? But we would love to offer this up again, and we already kind of got permission from Caitlin. If this is something that would be beneficial to you, reach out to the Peer Connect folks and just let them know that you'd be interested in more information. There's some misinformation, betrayal issues of really what happens at home, and this connecting people with really the home piece that we'd love to offer up as a part 2, if you will. So on behalf of Chateau and Ben, I'll let you kind of say your goodbyes here in a second, but thank you all so much for tuning in. We appreciate you guys so much.
Yeah.
Ben?
No, I just want to say thanks. The fact that you're here means you're part of the solution. Love it. Thanks for doing what you do. Thanks for letting us be a part of it. And yeah, if there's other things we can do to help guide you in this process, as you're in the trenches, advocating and fighting for folks who don't know how to say it and do it themselves, just thanks for doing all that stuff, and let us know how we can help. Cool.
Just from us here at First Response Mental Health, I just wanted to extend a thank you again to Brad and Ben for doing this. We hope to have you guys back again soon. And as mentioned earlier, this webinar was recorded, so we will be sending out the recording to everyone that attended.
Awesome.
Thank you, Caitlin.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. See you guys.
See y'all. Be safe.
Okay.